Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Jim Willis. Before I bring him on, I have to thank sponsors. CuriosityStream. They are the award-winning destination for documentary series and features. They deliver shows across the full spectrum of the nonfiction genre. Satisfy your thirst for knowledge anywhere at any time with CuriosityStream. Subscriptions start at only $2.99 a month. Just click the link down in the description to get started. And right now is the perfect time to get an emergency food supply. If you've been watching my show, you know that some of the most brilliant researchers on the planet that have been guests agree that there is a huge possibility of food shortages in the near future, and you don't want to get caught unprepared. Check out My Patriot Supply. They are the experts in emergency preparedness. Right now, you get $70 off a 2-week supply and $100 off a 4-week. Just click that link in the description or visit preparewithfkn.com to get yours today. Tonight, I want to welcome Jim Willis. After graduating from Eastman High School of Music, he was a high school band and orchestra teacher during the day, a symphony trombonist on the weekends, jazz musician at night, and a choral conductor on Sunday mornings. Before earning his master's degree in religion and entering the Protestant ministry for 40 years. He is the author of 13 books on spirituality and lost civilizations. He served as an adjunct college professor in the fields of world religions and instrumental music, and he is the host of his own drive time radio show, an arts council director, and a guest lecturer speaking about topics ranging from historical studies to contemporary spirituality. His teaching career produced both the comprehensive 1-volume Encyclopedia of Religion, the Religion Book, and Armageddon Now, written with his wife, Barbara. And upon retirement, he was determined to confront the essential spirituality that has inspired humankind since the very beginnings of time. The result of this quest is chronicled in his books, The Dragon Awakes, Rediscovering Earth Energy, Ancient Gods and Supernatural Gods, and his recent books include Lost Civilizations, The Quantum Akashic Field, Hidden History, Ancient Aliens and the Suppressed Origins of Civilization, and Censoring God, The Suppression of the Lost Books of the Bible and Other Scriptures. Jim, welcome. How are you tonight?
Doing fine, Chris. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yes, welcome. I've been looking forward to this. Some of my favorite topics are our hidden history, advanced civilizations. And I remember growing up and learning about our Rockefeller-approved history through the educational system that we have, and just having this knowing and feeling deep down inside that there was so much more to it, so much that we were missing. And when I started to look into it and interview amazing researchers like yourself, I realized just how much profound information is left out and intentionally suppressed, information that completely changes the entire nature of our reality, our history. Everything that we know could be so much different, and I think our civilization could be so much better off if we really knew what our true history was. And we are indeed a species with amnesia. I'd like to start out by knowing what got you started down your path.
When I went into ministry, I was in my young 20s. Most of us just kind of assumed that ministry was going to be a surrounding ourselves with a big family. It was all interested in spiritual growth and learning more about these things. And it turned out that wasn't the way it was at all. Being a minister of a church is pretty similar to any other job. You're always thinking about the next this and the next that and everything else, what comes next, and getting tied up in all the technology of the world and trying to stay current and all this kind of thing. So when I retired, I wanted to get away from that. I wanted to really confront the essential reality that I've been preaching about, but never really had the time to experience. And so we came out here to the woods of South Carolina, and lo and behold, we found ourselves living right on a place which has been used by ancient Americans for maybe as long as 50,000 years. Now, I know that goes against the grain of most archaeology, but right down the river from us, right down the Savannah River from us, is an archaeological site that has just turned over the whole field of archaeology. Dr. Al Goodyear has done a super job down there for years. It's called the Topper site. And he has found evidence that has been tested by so many independent labs and everything else that say people were here and they were living on the spot of ground where we live right now for some 50,000 years. And I wanted to relate to them. I wanted to find out who they were. It just occurs to me that they were here for a whole lot longer than recorded history. And if these new archaeological finds out in California stand up, and which they seem to be doing, going back 130,000 years, which means that people were living here on this continent, on the spot of ground where we live, for possibly even 100,000 years, and we don't know anything about it. And I just couldn't let that go. So I had to start studying, and the deeper I went, the more disturbed I got. I used to be a college teacher, and I taught comparative religion. And so I would do what most college professors did. We had a class to prepare, we had lectures, and we had our syllabus, and we had our textbooks, and we followed what was in the textbooks. But I began to get more and more disturbed, because what I was finding out was that the people who wrote the textbooks wrote them because they were approved by the publishers, who were following the advice of the people who had written the textbooks before then. And when you try to put in something new like this, there is a tremendous backlash from the establishment. People like myself, for instance. I mean, I stood up in front of a class of students, and I taught them something about, let's say I was teaching Hinduism, and I would teach them about the settlement of India. And I would follow how the Aryans came down through the Khyber Pass and all that kind of thing. And that was the typical thing, and I taught it. Then years go by, and all of a sudden, you're left with something that's totally different. And what do you do now to these students who said, I had to test you, and because of the nature of the school, I had to give you an exam. And the people who parroted back what I said, I gave them a better grade. And in other words, they were better students. They got a higher thing. Now I'm supposed to go and say, okay, all of you students, sorry, I was wrong. That's difficult to do. And lo and behold, I discovered that when it comes to archaeology, archaeology has denominations, just like my Christianity, my Christian religion did. There are archaeologists who believe this and archaeologists who believe that, and they form their own little groups, their own little archaeological denominations, and we're right, and you're wrong, and that's it. And the whole thing just so disturbed me so much that I decided that now that I had time to start doing some serious research and serious writing, I would. So we came out here to the woods 11 years ago, and we were going to stay for 1 year and just experience the changing of the seasons for 1 year. And that was 11 years ago. We're still going strong, and 13 books later or something like that. So there's just so much work that needs to be done. On the other hand, it's led me to some great long-distance friendships, meeting people like Andrew Collins and meeting people like Dean Radin and other people who are at the cutting edge of what's going on. It's just a wonderful thing. And all of us are excited, and then we get frustrated because we can't get the word out. And then shows like yours come along, which help people get the word out. We really appreciate it. You're doing good work. Thank you.
Oh,
we really appreciate it.
And thank you so much. And you were completely right when it comes to modern academia, how hard it must be for some of the long-standing researchers that have stuck by their guns with a certain belief or certain research, and then all of a sudden something comes along to shatter their paradigm.
Yeah.
And this is happening so fast now. All these new things that we're learning about our history, pushing back the age of humans to, like you said, over 100,000 years and even further, in different places of the world. So it's going so fast. Modern academia has got to start adjusting and catching up in a lot of ways, I think.
You would sure think so. A great example of that is here in America. We had an archaeological doctrine that was set in stone, and it went on for almost 75 years, as long as I've been alive. And that was what was called Clovis First. The Clovis people were the first people to come here. And they came over the Siberian land bridge maybe 13, maybe 16,000 years ago. And they spread out all over across the continent. And that's how old people, along people have been in America. They held on to that for the longest time, even though there were places like the Topper site, like Meadowcroft Shelter up in Pennsylvania, and places out in Mexico, in New Mexico, and of course the great site down in Peru, which just knocks all the stuffing out of this thing. And for a while they held on and were just holding on and holding on. And now Clovis First is, quite frankly, in shreds. It isn't that way at all. The Clovis people were not the first people at all. Matter of fact, maybe they didn't even come, all of them come over the Siberian land bridge, like was said. Maybe some even came from Europe. New DNA, which, you know, DNA has been the gold standard now for the last 10 years, 15 years. And even new DNA studies show a direct correlation between DNA in South Africa, South America along the Amazon River, a direct connection with Indonesia. It's just absolutely phenomenal, but it's hard dying. You know, you keep a doctrine in place for 75 years, hard to all of a sudden break it and say, no, it didn't happen that way at all.
Right. And another thing is, I mean, we know there have been multiple cataclysms throughout our history that have wiped out good portions of the population, almost, you know, at times probably almost completely knocking out, humanity to where there's very small amounts of survivors. And this, we don't know exactly how many times this may have happened throughout the complete history of our world and how far back. I mean, we could have advanced humans that could be millions of years old that were just destroyed by a cataclysm and had to rebuild.
Absolutely. When I moved here to South Carolina, hardly anybody accepted in the scientific community, hardly anybody accepted the Younger Dryas Comet theory, for instance, of 12,800 years ago, and then possibly another one of 11,500, 600 years ago. Hardly anybody accepted that. And that was just 11 years ago. And now there's a formidable group of very, very credentialed scientists who, using through a variety of disciplines, have said that certainly there was a catastrophic event here that happened. I can't wait till next year. I was supposed to go this September. I was supposed to have just been coming back, as a matter of fact, from leading a tour to Turkey. I'm sponsoring it with Ancient Origins, and we were going to be spending 2 days at Göbekli Tepe and everything else. And that whole Anatolian civilization, Göbekli Tepe itself, probably the first temple that was built after the Younger Dryas Ice Age, probably in response to that great cataclysm. I can't wait to go there. We're scheduled to go, like I say, this month. But of course, with the pandemic and all, we couldn't do it. So we've put it off for a year, but we will be going next September. And to be able to stand right there where civilization began, probably in response to a great cataclysm that even 11 years ago nobody accepted, that's pretty thrilling. That's pretty thrilling.
And I was going to ask you about Göbekli Tepe. It seems that was one of the first sites that have discovered with truly advanced type of stonework. And it seems like all of a sudden mankind just got this jump in intelligence and just, we're able to produce these beautiful works and temples.
Yeah. If we're to accept the archaeological story, what happened was there was a bunch of hunter-gatherers around the plains of Anatolia, and they were just barely subsiding. They were just desperately trying to stay alive. And then all of a sudden, one day they woke up and said, let's start moving megaton boulders around the countryside and set them up. Obviously, there's only two ways to it. Either there was a tremendous leap in knowledge. They either learned how to do it very, very quickly, which seems very difficult to accept, or they were taught. And so the big question is, who taught them? And more, I found evidence for advanced civilizations that existed in the past. A coastal civilization, probably, that was pretty advanced during the Younger Dryas time. From maps that I've studied and from other in indications that I go to more deeply in my books, they were probably at least at the level that we were when Columbus sailed across the ocean, maybe even more. And this civilization all of a sudden disappeared. And you can almost see how the survivors of this lost civilization managed to make their way to certain places around the world, such as Anatolia, where Göbekli Tepe was, and Egypt and Mesopotamia, perhaps Central America and Peru, China, other places like that, and tried to take the hunter-gatherer people who lived there and give them a boost, so to speak, perhaps even establish some kind of religious or mythological tradition that would prepare the people if something like this ever happened again. And Göbekli Tepe was probably the first of this. It seems to be a temple that was built for a specific purpose. And this purpose, it was even before the agricultural revolution, before we were growing grain on a large scale. So it just doesn't seem at all plausible to me that this could have been just a natural evolutionary thing. I think it points to a civilization that existed before. Perhaps even this was the civilization that was so advanced that although they were humans with a greater basis of knowledge than the hunter-gatherers of Anatolia, as the generations went by, the legends about them grew and grew and grew until eventually they were remembered as gods. And this could be the result. In my book, Ancient Gods, this is one of the things I try to cover, that possibly a lot of the mythological religious concepts that we have came from these ancient people who were just so much more advanced that they seemed mythologically or religiously as in the place of gods. Fascinating concepts.
It is, and it brings me to the next thing I wanted to get to. When you look at the Sumerian mythos, then leading into the Egyptian, where they seem to be communicating with either spiritual or otherworldly or off-planet beings, and getting information from them, worshiping them. It makes me. I've always wondered, are these just archetypes, or were they really communicating with some sort of intelligence?
Yeah, I think we have to really consider the idea of, as you say, a different intelligence, either off planet or perhaps from another dimension. It just doesn't seem possible to me that all of the mythology we have is you can't just explain it away like Carl Jung did by saying it's just archetypes. There probably is some of that, of course, but there are just too many stories. For instance, I was a Christian minister for 40 years before I retired, so I would preach from the Bible every Sunday. And now I go back and I read that same Bible, and I'm absolutely amazed, because there it was right in front of me, the stories of Elijah and going up to heaven in a fiery chariot, and the story of Ezekiel rather, and then the story of Elijah meeting the wheel within the wheel, and that thing that certainly looks like what Eric Van Daniken called chariots of the gods. There are just so many of those stories that if you try to explain them away as archetypal mythology or as simply stories that are told to preach a moral or an ethical lesson, it just doesn't fit. You don't need that kind of physical detail to teach a moral lesson. To be honest, I was never a believer in the Atlantis tradition, for instance. I never gave it much stock at all because I was too much of a left brain thinker, But why would, in heaven's name, Plato go to the effort of giving us all of that extraneous information if he was just making up a story to teach his kids, his students? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I have to look for something very real beyond it. And of course, now with ever since Hugh Everett and gave us the whole idea of the collapse of into the quantum world and other dimensions and the many worlds theories that are being classically talked about nowadays, if all of this activity exists outside of our perception realm, it just seems to me that we cannot automatically assume that somehow beings from outside of our perception realm, the realm that's bounded by the five senses, haven't been able to step through the barrier. And of course, when I came up here and started my own meditation, and when I had my first out-of-body experience, and then my second and third, and now who knows how many now, when I was able to step outside that perception realm and see things that you can't even explain because our language here is just so inadequate. If I can do it, then why can't they do it? And I can't help but think this has to be the norm. And the only reason that we're not getting into this a lot more is because science just refuses to study it. I think there's enough evidence out there to really look into it. Dean Radin and his wonderful book, Real Magic, that just came out, it's been translated into 2 different languages right now, is doing serious scientific work, scientific study out at the Noetic Institute. And when he starts talking about these things seriously and presenting them in very serious scientific papers, and other groups like, for instance, the Monroe Institute, and they're studying out-of-body theories and things like that, they're not just doing this woo-woo New Age stuff. I mean, they're doing serious science. And this is the direction it's pointing in. I just find that fascinating. I really do.
Man, it's like you're reading my mind, because you went right into the next topic. I wanted to talk about this concept of the superspectrum, where there's these other realities that exist right beyond the spectrum of our vision. And I recently had my first, what I would call, contact experience just by meditating. I actually had communication with this entity, psychic communication, and it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. It was a very profound experience. In fact, it changed everything, and it gave me this kind of confirmation that this is real. This other realm, these other realms, they exist, and there's entities that are out there. At least the ones I spoke to appeared to be looking out for my own good, like guides or angels.
Yeah. When I wrote one of my latest books, The Quantum Akashic Field, it was about it's called a kind of a guide, a spiritual guide for the out-of-body traveler. When I wrote that book, I was expecting just to be laughed away. I didn't think any publisher would touch it except some kind of far-out thing. When I started talking about it on the air or on podcasts, especially when people would call in, I just was expecting to be just laughed off the stage. And yet I found person after person after person. By now, even in the last couple of years, there have been 100 people who told me the very same story that you did. And that says to me 2 things. Number one, it's very real, especially when all these stories are so similar in so many ways. But also it tells me that perhaps something is happening. Perhaps the human race is reaching a stage of evolution right now, which opens up the possibilities of finally communicating with these kinds of entities that you communicated with. And it's just not far out stuff anymore. It's turning mainline, and quickly, if only we can get the establishment, the scientific establishment, to look seriously at it. When I went up to the Monroe Institute, it was really great hearing stories from people like Skip Atwater, for instance, telling me that back in the days of the Cold War, the Army, Skip Atwater was in charge of this whole Army unit who was designed to try to train remote viewers. And the purpose was spying. They wanted to know where the enemy subs were. They wanted to know what the enemy is. And so the Army was actually training these people, but we didn't find out about it. They didn't tell us about anything. They took it seriously enough to use it, but they kept it quiet. And it's only now that the records are being released that we're discovering that this has been mainstream a whole lot longer than we ever were told.
Definitely, I'd love for it to be more looked into, mainstream academia. I think it could take us leaps and bounds into, what now considered as paranormal and metaphysical could become actual science if we actually look into this stuff more.
I think it is. I forgot which author it was. Maybe, I can't remember, who said that any Science, if it's sufficiently advanced, is going to seem like magic. Arthur C. Clarke, I think, was the one who said that, and I really think he's probably got a good point. It isn't magic. It isn't just it's metaphysical. I think when we discover what it really is, we're going to discover it's a science that we just didn't know yet. That takes us full turn back to the old civilizations again, because I became convinced that this isn't something that we're learning for the first time. I think our ancestors were much more adept at this than we are. I think when people say, how did they build these great megaliths? I think that very well possibly could have been in touch with this kind of thing, where they could move these rocks without, or these boulders, without the levers and pulleys and ropes and electricity and things that we have today. There were other ways to do it. I like to say they had what I call a psychic toolkit, but they're gone. And we've moved away from that. We moved away from that beginning 12,000 years ago, when we came out of the so-called Stone Age and began a direct line toward modern civilization. And I sometimes worry about modern civilization, because we're just so busy, and it's so noisy, and it's so fast, that we can't take the time to do the kind of meditation and deep meditation that it takes to move outside of this perception realm. Socrates once said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." And we've all got busy lives, but boy, they're pretty barren nowadays.
Yeah, but I do see something encouraging with everything that's happened in 2020 with this whole pandemic situation. I see a lot of people opening up their eyes to things. I see a lot of people kind of looking more into the hidden world and waking up a bit. So that's very encouraging to me. I want to go back for a minute to we were talking about the Sumerian mythos. I'd like to get your thoughts on the Anunnaki. If you think these were either spiritual or off-planet beings that came here to either genetically modify us and teach us. What are your thoughts on the Anunnaki?
It depends what day you ask me. There are times when I can see them as that lost civilization that we were talking about, that was very advanced. The only trouble is, the more I read the stories of the Anunnaki, the more I find things that are just too advanced, even for an strictly earthbound lost civilization. I find it very believable that when we look back into our history of how we became human, I find it very instructive to read the stories about the Anunnaki. And there are stories that are amazing that you find from all over the world that fit. For instance, one of the great stories about Enki and Enlil wanted to destroy the world with, one of them wanted to destroy the world with a flood. And the other, of course, saved Utnapishtim, and who was probably
seemed that Enki was more compassionate a little bit.
Yeah, and so some people were guided safely through, whether it was Noah or Utnapishtim, however you wanted to say that. Okay, it's a great story, but then I come over here and I read the story of the Hopi. And in their own legends, they have a story of a great flood flooding the world, one of their four worlds. And the people who helped them out were their friends, the ant people. And if you look in the Hopi language and listen to them and speak about the ant people, in Hopi, Anu is ant, and Naki is friends or people. So here, the Hopi in their language have the ant people, the Anunnaki, who helped them through a great flood. Is that just a coincidence? I have a tendency to doubt it. Do we have absolute unequivocal proof of this? No, but a lot of times crimes are solved through circumstantial evidence that is just so overwhelming, you have to at least consider it. And I think we've come to the point where we really have to do that. We have to start taking these things seriously and saying, okay, it's a great myth, it's a story, it's blown up, it has all these possibilities. But if we begin to look at the essential meaning of it, what does it mean? The fact is, it's very difficult to discover, and I had two biologists who I worked with on my last book. It's very difficult to describe how human DNA could have come into effect all at once without some kind of tampering, because there are just too many moving parts that have to all come together at the same time. It's just too big a coincidence. And the fact that when you find these stories told all around the world, where these people probably had had no contact for thousands of years, it really makes you think that, no, there's more there. So if you have to press me on it, I think we have to do a lot more work about the Anunnaki. Of course, Sitchin was, started the whole thing off with his books and everything else. But then you talk about these people who have just brought up these things. Of course, there's all everything. Lots of other people look at too. The Nazca lines. How do you possibly just explain the Nazca lines in Peru? How do you describe? How do you possibly explain why people built some temples where they did, way away from any convenient place for materials or for people to live, where the resources were? They built them there because there was some kind of power there, some kind of earth energy, or some place where they met an energy that was off earth. And I just find that kind of stuff too compelling to resist. I really do.
Yeah, and when it comes to some of the technology that we could have possibly had, when you look at places like, of course, the Great Pyramid, but then Pumapunku, Baalbek, these amazing structures all around the planet, it seemed to point to that not only were they extremely advanced, but there was some sort of like global civilization or spiritual practices going on. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. I had a wonderful experience when I visited the Giza Plateau and went down into the Great Pyramid. We're walking down this long tunnel, and you can't go there without a guide. So he's taking our small group in there, and we're walking down this tunnel, and I'm a little bit claustrophobic, so I'm getting a little bit worried anyway, And I'm looking down along the pathway where we're walking, and this wooden pathway they had built for us, and I see these electrical wires that are going along both sides of the pathway. And the reason for the wires is they're powering the lights so we can see where we're going. Well, it occurred to me when they built this thing, and the workers came, they didn't have electric wires. So, how did they see? So I started looking up on the sides and on the roof to look for soot or smoke or something like that, and there was none. So I said to the guide who was right ahead of me, I said, "Hey, got a question for you." And he said, "Oh yeah, sure." And I said, "There's no soot, there's no smoke. They couldn't have brought torches. How did they see to get down here before electricity?" He actually turned away from me and said, "Oh, they probably had some kind of light source," and walked on. And that was his explanation. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
Crazy. Now, okay, so this has been one of the toughest things that researchers have tried to answer is, first of all, how do they build structures like the Great Pyramids? How did they move these blocks? And places like Pumapunku, the precise cuts and the boreholes. I mean, it's fascinating. These things we can't even recreate today. So what are your thoughts on the possible technologies that they could have had?
Well, the only thing I can say for sure is they certainly had technologies that we don't understand, because we would be hard pressed today to do some of the things they did. If you go to Lebanon today and look at some of the huge stones that have been carved out to be used, the biggest one on the planet down there at Baalbek. Now, obviously, they were cutting this out. They obviously meant to pick it up and somehow move it. How? We couldn't do it, but they did. So I think all we can say, we can speculate as to what kind of a technology they had, and we can argue about what it might have been. But we certainly have to agree on the fact that whatever it was a technology. We don't understand it, and it was in many ways far, far advanced. But you mentioned even earlier about the human lifespans being pushed back all the time. when I first started teaching, the out of Africa theory said that we came out of Africa about 100,000 years ago. Well, that was pushed back to 200,000 years, not readily acceptable, except in the last 5 years, it's been pushed back to 300,000 years. Now, if just in a short time you can push our species back 300,000 years, and the latest evidence says that perhaps we didn't come out of Africa at all. We might have come in different places, and if our DNA was manipulated, it could have been something that happened all over the world. We different spots around the world. So we just don't know, but as we go back and back, it gives us plenty of time to put advanced civilizations into that slot. And as you said earlier, what happened to them? Well, perhaps catastrophe, perhaps they just left. Who knows? We just don't know. But I think if we close our minds and say it can't be this way because it doesn't seem that way to us today, I think we made a big mistake, big mistake.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned how, some of these civilizations seem to have just disappeared. They have some researchers that believe that it's possible that some of these advanced civilizations went underground, and they could still have possibly civilizations living beneath the earth now in some kind of, not really hollow earth, but maybe something similar. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just don't know. We don't seem to have any evidence except from mythology here and there. So it seems utterly fantastic, but I'm not going to close my mind to it. I'm really not. You can't find what you don't look for. And if you decide beforehand what you're not going to find, you'll never find it. And so I think that's another one of those points that we have to be very serious about. When we go to Turkey next year, one of the things we're going to study, we're going to go is travel underground to the underground cities of Derinkuyu. Anatolia is riddled with these civilizations that go back possibly 10, 12,000 years. And are huge, huge amounts of people could go in there and live in there, and did. So you just can't you just can't close your mind to it. In our own country, there's all kinds of fantastic stories about the Grand Canyon, for instance, and stories of things that happened out there. I just don't know. I'm not gonna say no. That's for sure.
Right. And another huge, fascinating piece of this puzzle is the fact that around a lot of these megalithic and monolithic sites, there have been elongated skulls found. And I know Brian Forrester does a lot of work with this. I got to
Yes,
sit
that's right.
down and talk with him. And also, bones of giants, or, taller individuals than your average, a lot taller. Do you think that these could have possible links to some of these advanced or even Anunnaki people?
Yes, I do. I do, and I never did. And it's surprising for me to be able to say unequivocally, yes, I do, because I spent my whole life thinking that these things were just crazy. That Brian Forster's work was, he's just trying to sell books or something like that. No, there's just too much that cannot be explained. And what bothers me is when specialists who go into a study like this with the deliberate intention of trying to disprove it rather than to look at the evidence. This happened down, for instance, in Peru, when the site down there that just really upended all of archaeology, because it took us back thousands of years before people thought there were anybody here in the world. I mean, in this part of the world. And when the scientists went down there deliberately to disprove it, and many of them thought that they did, but many of them went down there just to study the evidence. And lo and behold, when they studied the evidence and let the evidence speak for itself, they came convinced that no, there was something real here, something very real here. We had something like that happen right here on our own property. When my wife Barb and I moved out here, we began to find these stone piles in the woods all over the place. And we wondered, well, what are they doing here? Now, some of them could be explained by early farmers who wanted to clean their fields up, and they were growing cotton when cotton was king down here in the South, and so they would pile these stones. And so I just accepted for the longest time, well, they were made by the early European farmers. But then I started reading the diaries of people who came into this part of the country for the first time, Europeans, the Spaniards under De Soto. And as they came through, they would meet these Indian paths, and they would find these in their diaries written 300 years ago, 400 years ago. They would talk about finding these stone piles. And they would ask the Indians, who built the stone piles? And the Indians said, I don't know. They were here when we came here. Well, when we began to find all of these stone piles, we decided to start doing some digging ourselves. One of them, well, a number of them are on our property, but one of them especially looked especially good for us. So we decided to do some archaeology ourselves. So what we did was took this stone pile apart. And what you would expect to find on a stone pile is that the big rocks are at the bottom and the small rocks are on the top. That isn't what we found at all. The deeper we went, the smaller the rocks got, until we got down to this floor of what archaeologists call lithic debitage, or stone debitage. Obviously, somebody who had been a worker in stone sat here and would chip out stone tools. We found a lot of their stone tools on this property. But these stone piles were such an enigma, and they seemed to be located on the tops of ridges around us. And so we got a friend of ours who is he goes out in the field and does surveying, and he has all the electronic gizmos. So what he did was, he gave me a whole day of his time. It was just a wonderful thing. We went around and we plotted each of these stone piles on all of these ridges. And he said, now let's go back to the office. I'll put them out on paper. I'll print them out and see what it looks like. So he entered them all into his computer and did all the stuff that a surveyor would do. And out came this picture that looked so familiar to me, because I had just been reading the work of Andrew Collins about Cygnus the Swan. And in Cygnus the Swan, there is 7 particular stars that form what is called the Christmas cross, because on December 25th, at the time around the solstice here, it stands right up on the horizon, right in front of our house. And so I began to look at it, and I adjusted them both for size and put one, the document from the surveyor, right on top of a star chart of the Christmas cross in Cygnus the Swan, and they were perfectly matched. So that's how I got to meet Andrew Collins. I emailed him right away. He's the foremost expert on Cygnus in the world, I think, today. I told him about what I had found, and he emailed me back within, a couple of hours. And he said, is there any mythology around where you are in your part of the country about bird cults? Well, just so happens right over the Savannah River, there's the hawk effigy and the eagle effigy, which are open for tourists right now. People come and look at them a lot. And so I wrote back and I said, yeah, we began this long-term friendship. And what we discovered was these stone piles on the top of the ridges, if on the night of the winter solstice, way back when, before all the trees had grown up, when it was still plains and a lot more rock and things like that, if you were to build a fire at each of these ridges, you would see on the ground an exact replica of what you would see in the sky if you looked up and saw Cygnus the Swan. And I'm absolutely convinced that there was a bird cult there. That started, like I said, my friendship with Andrew Collins, which brings us back to the Turkey trip, because Andrew wrote a book a while back called From the Ashes of Angels, and it was dedicated to the Kurdish people. Well, of course, that doesn't help in Turkey with the political thing the way it is right now. So Andrew was banned from the country. That's why I'm going to Turkey. He said, "Can you fill in for me?" So it's just amazing how all of this fits together. And yeah, in answer to your question, I can see all kinds of evidence of these kinds of things that exist in many, many different fields. Too many to discount as an accident or as a coincidence.
Yeah, and just recently, we've found evidence of the opposite spectrum, very little people, hobbit type people that have existed. And I find that very interesting too, that these tiny people possibly could have been existing at the same time as giants and all these other things that we used to consider mythological creatures.
Yeah, yeah. I would have loved to have been, oh, Indonesia and Russia and South when the Denisovans, those very massive giant-like species, were living up north, and the Hobbit people, the small people down in Indonesia. Can you imagine what it would have looked like to look at this 7 or 8 foot giant and look at this little 3 foot thing and realize they were both the same age, for instance, But look at, we're an amazing species. We really are.
Definitely. And one of the other most fascinating things about whenever I learn about ancient civilizations is their knowledge of the stars and astronomy and, navigation and all these things that it takes us this massive amount of technology just to, navigate across country or, over the ocean. And they were doing this based on the stars in the sky. And I find that quite fascinating.
They were not primitive people. That's the biggest mistake we made of teaching our kids, that these were primitive people. They just had a totally different knowledge. I often like to think that if you brought one of them into our society and dressed them up, put them on modern clothes, taught them how to speak our language, they would fit in just fine. If you took one of us and made us go back and survive in his world, I don't think we'd last a week. And I'm so fascinated by the fact that the stars are tremendously interesting, and they learned a lot about them. But I tend to go even one step farther. I think when they studied the heavens, they were studying something that was speaking to them vestigially, saying, this is where we came from. This is where our ancestors came from. This is where our gods came from. Yeah, again, we find it in Christianity. We find Jesus saying, I am the morning star. In Christianity, I've been absolutely amazed that people say, well, this can't happen. You can't have creatures from another dimension or from the stars coming down here into our world. That isn't Christian somehow. But then we stand up at Christmas time and we sing, angels from the realms of glory, or hark the herald angels sing, or angels I have seen on high, or we talk about the angel Gabriel coming down to Mary. And earlier in the Jewish tradition, there was the same angel Gabriel who appeared to Daniel, or in the Islamic tradition, it was the same angel Gabriel who dictated the Quran to Muhammad. This was an actual, I don't want to say physical, because physical would pertain to our perception of, but an actual being that appears to have stepped out of another dimension. And he's recognized in 3 of the great religions of the world, and all of the followers who follow that religion say, no, there are no extra dimensional beings. It just doesn't make any sense.
Now, earlier we were talking about how our planet has experienced multiple cataclysms that has knocked out a large portion of humanity, and there are many scientists and researchers think that we're long overdue for the next one. We have plenty of Earth changes occurring right now. Our magnetic north is rapidly moving towards Siberia. We've got all this space debris that's, seemed to have all of a sudden come out of nowhere. Do you think that we're overdue for a large cataclysm?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think the old timers might have known it, and they may have even predicted it. On one of the great columns at Göbekli Tepe, there seems to be, and this of course is subject to interpretation and subject to a lot of argument, but there seems to be a star chart, so to speak, that describes the heavens not as they were then, but as they are now. And it almost makes me wonder if these people who studied the heavens so much were able to see this great comet before it collided with the Earth. They were to see it for days with the comet getting bigger and bigger. And they would be able to plot it perhaps over the course of 2 or 3 years, like Halley's comet when it comes around, with us, perhaps plot it. And I almost wonder if they were able to say, it's going to hit here now, and it's going to do it again when the heavens have shifted and they look like this, and they took that picture of the heavens, put it on the rock. And if that is the case, it almost seems as if this comet might have been part of the Taurid meteor stream that we look at twice a year now. Of course, for those who are not quite so familiar with the Earth, is in the center, and it's surrounded by this great donut of a huge comet that disintegrated thousands of years ago into small pieces. And it circles us, and twice a year we go through it, and we see all the shooting stars, like when John Denver wrote his song about "I've seen it raining fire in the sky," Rocky Mountain High. He was looking at the Taurid meteor stream. Well, of course, we go through a different part of the Taurid meteor stream all the time, but it makes us wonder, are there still in that Taurid meteor stream huge comets? And I'm talking about comets that could destroy life as we know it. And were the ancients able to say, when the stars look like this, we're going to be right there again? And if that's the case, in Graham Hancock's frightening book about this whole thing, he suggested that perhaps within the next 10, 12 years, we could theoretically come across a comet that we just can't control. We're looking for them all the time. And isn't it surprising that we're told, oh, if it comes, we'll see it? Well, how many have gotten through? We didn't hear about them until it would have been too late in just the last couple of years. So, yeah, I think we're overdue. And I think we need to keep looking. I don't know what we're going to do except wait for it to come.
Hey, maybe Trump's already got some secret Space Force weapon that can blow up an asteroid. You never know.
I don't know. I've got a sneaking suspicion that other civilizations have gone this way, and I don't know why we think we're somehow any different.
Right. Well, what are your thoughts on modern day academia? Do you think that they are going to, maybe say within the next few years, kind of come around to exploring the metaphysical side of things? And do you think that quantum physics is actually bringing us closer to that point?
Yeah. Two things about that. The first, when you talk about quantum physics, I think that in quantum physics, we have discovered, through the use of mathematics, we have discovered a world that we just didn't know existed. And it just seemed positive. I mean, you talk about academia not accepting things. Albert Einstein didn't even accept quantum physics until later in his life. He just wouldn't do it. Entanglement theory, spooky action at a distance, that kind of thing. So I think that we're discovering that realm. Unfortunately, I think we're not really discovering it. We are rediscovering it through mathematics. I think it's the very same realm that shamans have been exploring for 40, 50,000 years, or maybe even a lot longer than that. And I think what that says is, in our generation, we're seeing something fantastic happen. What we're seeing is science has been going on this road, and metaphysics has been going on this road, and in our generation, I think they've met onto one superhighway. So I think that is in itself is a really, really encouraging sign. And I was going to mention I forgot the first part of your question. I answered the second part first.
Oh, no, I was just going to see if you think that, they're going to, integrate the metaphysics into.
I remember I think that science is going to start accepting this more, not just because of the scientific stuff, but because they're going to be forced to do it by the public and by the younger guys who are coming along, younger people who are coming along. And the reason I say that is academia used to have a real hold, a solid hold on what could get published and what couldn't. You had to go through a tremendous process of getting your new idea approved. And if they didn't like it, you were blackballed. Hugh Everett, for instance, is the classic example, who gave us the multiverse. He just couldn't get couldn't get off the ground. As a result, he couldn't get hired, he couldn't get tenure, he couldn't get any projects. He had to leave physics altogether. One of the most brilliant physics guys that we've ever had, and he had to leave altogether. He's probably just as good as he did. He actually went to work for Washington, and his papers were the ones that were the basis of the doctrine called mutually assured destruction, which may have got us through the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. But at any rate, that was the way it always was for so long. Now, though, something has happened. We got the internet, we got television, and some of these younger scientists, men and women, can do an end run around academia and get their ideas out there in front of the public through shows like yours or through television programs. And the people hear it and they start to demand it, saying, what is this? And they can put forth their argument without having to go through that horrible process that in one way it was good because it kept all of the quack theories out, but in another way, it really held back a lot of this new scientific insight. So I think a lot of the younger scientists who are just brilliant people are going to be getting their ideas out there. It's a brand new world out there, that's for sure.
Yeah, we do live in very interesting and fascinating times. And to close out tonight, I want to get your thoughts on, I see a global raising in consciousness. I see people kind of awakening and becoming, so I guess you could say, more spiritual. I've noticed this amongst my own personal friends and people I've talked through the show. And also I've noticed that there have been people who have had more profound contact experiences, these experiences where it's, meditative states and you're actually communicating, or even physical contact. Do you think that sometime maybe within our lifetime or the next few years, it's just going to become accepted that, yes, this super spectrum exists, these beings exist, and we have the ability to communicate with them, and we'll have this open communication like we seem to have in our ancient past?
I think we have to. And the reason I think that is because we have entered a time of history where our technology is much too dangerous. We're playing with toys that are just much too dangerous. We can't handle them. We don't have the moral and the ethical response yet to be able to handle the kind of power that is out of control. We can ruin the planet, we can destroy ourselves. And I think, frankly, the only way out is to open our eyes to a higher dimension and be able to get our minds away from this and say, there's something there that's real, perhaps with guides. Now, I know that this is a kind of I don't want to call it a savior kind of thing, look to the skies, your redemption draweth nigh and all that kind of stuff. But it almost, I think, has to be that way because we are just not prepared spiritually to handle what we have done physically. So if we don't open our eyes to this, I think we will become another lost civilization, and someone somewhere else will have to begin again.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you 100%. And Jim, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Oh,
Very
Chris,
enlightening. Yes,
great being with you.
Yeah, I had a great time, and I'd love to have you back on sometime in the future.
Oh, I'd love to. Real good. We'll look for you, Chris.
Definitely. Well, have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. You too.